A man once asked an old storyteller, "What is the strongest cage in the world?" The storyteller smiled and said, "The one without bars, the cage made of fear." Long ago, in a quiet valley surrounded by tall mountains, there was a small village where people believed the mountains were cursed. They said beyond those peaks lived storms, monsters, and endless danger. No one had ever climbed them, and no one dared to try. In that same village lived a young goat named Miko. Now, Miko was not the biggest goat, nor the strongest. In fact, he tripped over rocks more often than he'd like to admit. But he had one special habit. He asked questions. Too many questions. "Why don't we climb the mountain?" Miko asked one morning while chewing grass beside the other goats. An old goat named Baroon snorted. "Because no one returns." "Has anyone tried?" Miko asked. Baroon paused. "Well, no, but everyone knows it's dangerous." Miko tilted his head. "So we are afraid of something we have never seen." Baroon frowned. "Young goat, wisdom says when many people believe a story, it feels like truth." But Miko wasn't satisfied. Every day he stared at the mountain peaks glowing in the sunlight. Birds flew over them, clouds passed over them, even the wind crossed them freely. Strange, Miko thought. The wind is not afraid. One afternoon, while wandering near the forest, Miko met an old turtle named Taro. Taro had lived so long that even the trees seemed younger than him. "Why do you look at the mountains like they owe you money?" Taro asked slowly. I sighed. "Everyone says the mountains are too dangerous, but I keep wondering, what if they're wrong?" Taro chuckled. "Ah, the ancient battle of curiosity and fear." "Which one wins?" Miko asked. Taro looked up at the mountains and said, "The one you feed." Then he added a phrase Miko would never forget. "Fear is like a shadow. It looks big when you face away from the light." That night, Miko couldn't sleep. The valley felt smaller than ever. Finally, he made a decision. "I will climb the mountain." The next morning, the goats gasped. "You'll die," shouted Baroon. "You'll get lost," said another. "You'll embarrass the entire goat community," cried a third. Miko laughed nervously. "Well, that last one is definitely possible." But he began climbing anyway. The first part was easy. Grass, rocks, and fresh air. But the higher he went, the steeper it became. Soon he slipped on loose stones. Once he rolled down a small hill and landed in a bush. A squirrel watching nearby laughed so hard he nearly dropped his acorn. "First time climbing?" the squirrel asked. "Yes," Miko groaned. The squirrel shrugged. "Well, wisdom says every expert was once a beginner who looked ridiculous." Miko stood up again. Hours passed. Then the wind grew stronger. Clouds wrapped around the mountain like giant blankets. For a moment, Miko's heart pounded. What if they were right? He whispered. Fear began speaking in his mind. "You're too small. You're too weak. You don't belong here." Miko almost turned back, but then he remembered Taro's words. Fear is like a shadow. So he turned toward the light, the glowing sunset above the mountain. Step by step, he continued. Finally, after a long climb, Miko reached the top, and what he saw made him freeze. Not monsters, not storms, not danger. Beyond the mountain was a vast green valley, even bigger than the one he came from. Rivers sparkled like silver snakes. Trees stretched endlessly. Herds of animals roamed freely. It was beautiful.
Miko laughed so loudly that an eagle flying above looked down in confusion. "All this time, we were afraid of nothing," Miko said. After resting, he returned to the village. The goats gathered around him. Baroon squinted suspiciously. "So, did you see the monsters?" Miko smiled. "Yes," the goats gasped. "But the monsters," Miko continued, "were in our minds." Then he told them everything: the wind, the climb, the view, the endless valley. Some goats were amazed, some were doubtful. One goat said, "But what if you were just lucky?" Miko laughed. "Then go see for yourself." For a long time, no one moved. Finally, a small young goat stepped forward. "I'll try." Then another and another. Even Baroon slowly walked toward the mountain. Before leaving, Baroon turned to Miko and said quietly, "Perhaps the real danger was staying where fear told us to stay." Miko nodded, because he had learned something powerful. Fear does not build walls, it builds invisible cages. And the strangest thing about those cages is that the door is always open, but most creatures never try to push it. As an old village saying goes, a bird born in a cage thinks flying is a disease. But once someone flies, others begin to remember their wings. And that is why the old storyteller finished his tale by saying, "Fear limits your potential, but courage introduces you to the life you were meant to live."